This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Turkey's president says Egypt's actions in Libya are illegal. The African Union seeks to secure as many vaccine trials as possible for Africa. And Facebook's CEO slams Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is thje Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live, please. Tunisia presents a post-COVID recovery plan as it concludes an IMF funding program. And the rising cost of living drains savings as people stay out of work. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, thje. Well, the African Union Commission has launched an initiative that aims to secure as many COVID-19 vaccine trials as possible for the continent. The Africa CDC Consortium for COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials will have African countries work collectively to approach global vaccine developers and funders. CGTN's Koleto Wanjoy spoke to the director of the Africa CDC.
The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is concerned by the fast increase of COVID-19 cases on the continent. An average of 17,000 new cases are being reported every day. The continent is now looking at how to secure COVID-19 vaccines. Through a new initiative, the Africa CDC has begun engaging vaccine manufacturers and developers.
It's a complex issue to develop vaccines. It's a complex issue even to uptake for uptakes of vaccine. It's a complex issue to engage with the community. So I think we want to be sure that Africa CDC is pooling all the networks on the continent and the right partnerships to ensure that we fulfill that.
The Africa CDC is targeting to get more than 10 late-stage vaccine clinical trials to be carried out on the continent as soon as possible.
In an emergency, we are saying any vaccine that is promising anywhere and shows promise, we can test it on the continent as much as possible. Lastly is the clinical trials. We want to be sure that the sites are ready. So, for example, if the Oxford vaccine that Lane mentioned shows promise in South Africa, how can we expand that in several other places across the continent? Given the diversity of our continent, it's a continent of 1.3 billion.
So far, South Africa is the only country on the continent taking part in a COVID-19 vaccine trial. The vaccine being tested in South Africa was developed by the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom and is being tested in the UK and Brazil. The Africa CDC hopes that very soon, many more African countries will be engaged in similar COVID-19 vaccine trials. The plan for now is for African countries to participate in as many vaccine trials as possible, as well as other stages of the vaccine's development, as a way of positioning the continent for strategic acquisition as a bloc as soon as any vaccine is approved. Koleto Wanjoy, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
In international news, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has slammed the Trump administration's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which has taken the lives of over 138,000 people in the U.S. Zuckerberg says the country must do more.
At this point, it is clear that the trajectory in the U.S. is significantly worse than many other countries, and that our government and this administration have been considerably less effective in handling this. It's really disappointing that we still don't have adequate testing, that the credibility of our top scientists like yourself and the CDC are being undermined, and until recently, that parts of the administration were calling into question whether people should even follow basic best practices like wearing masks.
So what I would urge and almost plead with the younger people, because I know if they really understood this, they would take it seriously, that you have to have responsibility for yourself, but also a societal responsibility, that you're getting infected is not just you in a vacuum. You're propagating a pandemic.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced tentative steps to reopen the economy, expressing hope that the UK can return to normal in time for Christmas.
From October, we intend to bring back audiences in stadia and to allow conferences and other business events to recommence. Again, these changes must be done in a COVID-secure way, subject to the successful outcome of pilots. Throughout this period, we will look to allow more close contact between friends and family where we can. It is my strong and sincere hope that we will be able to review the outstanding restrictions and allow a more significant return to normality from November at the earliest, possibly in time for Christmas.
Well, Johnson went on to say that normal life would not return in full until November, adding the country should be ready for new outbreaks. Britain's economy has been battered by the pandemic, suffering a record 20% decline in April, but it is gradually recovering. The Bank of England said on Friday that economic activity had gone slightly up, but the full extent of the long-term damage to the economy remains unclear. Returning to news on the continent, leaders of Libya's tribes affiliated to General Khalifa Haftar have given their permission to Egypt's president and army to intervene in the conflict. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has answered the call by vowing to protect Libya's sovereignty should it be threatened. Libya's east-based lawmakers have also urged for Egypt's direct military support. Here's Adel Al-Mahrawi with the details.
Forces and militias backing Libya's government of national accord have been mobilizing their arms, preparing for a battle to enter Sirte. On Thursday, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi brought the heads of some of Libya's tribes together to get their consent for entering Libya if necessary. El-Sisi had earlier threatened a military intervention. That's if the GNA, backed by Turkish troops, attempts to capture the city from the Libyan National Army. The LNA receives support from Egypt and is allied to the GNA's rival administration in the east.
Mr. President, in the name of Libya and its tribes, we don't see that Egypt's intervention and its military against Turkish invasion is an intrusion or desire in its reaches. We are confident that it is a brother defending a brother.
Cairo's aim to protect its 1,200 kilometers western border with her oil-rich neighbor from what authorities say are various militia groups.
We don't have any intentions for these militias to come near us. Throughout the past years, we have never talked about entering Libya. The Sirte and Jufra line should not be surpassed. Neither the eastern forces nor the west or any other forces should cross it. Is this a call for war or peace? This is a call for peace, to begin negotiations and end the fighting. We won't enter unless you request it, and we will leave Libya when you order us to do so.
Libya's tribes have been gaining clout after the fall of Gaddafi regime in 2011. In the current conflict, the eastern tribes have lent their support to Khalifa Haftar, the head of the LNA.
All of them have welcomed Egypt's military intervention in Libya to maintain stability. This is a clear message to the militias and the countries supporting them. Egypt will not allow them to spread panic in the eastern part of Libya. Egypt knows that once militias rule, no country will flourish.
The Libyan National Army suffered a string of military losses following a year-long assault on Tripoli. Egypt has been alarmed by the recent military campaign that has seen GNA forces advance from Tripoli to Sirte. Cairo moved to get international support for a political roadmap to end the conflict in Libya. In addition to the tribal leaders, Egypt has also gotten the approval from the eastern-based Libyan parliament for a military intervention if needed. El-Sisi is threatening the GNA and the country supporting it with an escalation. Cairo has thrown the ball into their hands. They can either move their forces forward and ignite direct clashes between regional powers in Libya, or they can hold their grounds in a ceasefire that could see talks resume. Adel Al-Mahrawi, CGTN, Ras Sadr, Egypt.
Well, following these latest developments, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has denounced Egypt and the United Arab Emirates for supporting the forces based in eastern Libya. Turkey, of course, has been providing military aid to the Tripoli-based government in this conflict in Libya, while Egypt, the UAE and Russia have backed its foes in a rival administration based in the east. Recent weeks have seen dramatic military advances by the Tripoli government, which drove back forces of the eastern commander Khalifa Haftar, who, as we know, launched that assault on the capital last year. Now, the Sudanese government and a coalition of 9 opposition groups have entered into a final phase of peace talks. The government and the Sudanese Revolutionary Front are currently holding face-to-face talks in Juba. The government is also negotiating separately with a second coalition, but mediators describe these discussions as the most important component of Sudan's peace process. The talks aim to restore stability to Sudan's war-ravaged regions. From Juba, here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet.
Mediators say they are hopeful that a peace deal in Sudan can be reached within a few weeks. The only sticking point now is the security plan for the Darfur region in western Sudan. Mediators say issues concerning the regions of Kordofan, Blue Nile and Nuba Mountain have been addressed. Central to the negotiations is the incorporation of armed factions into a single army of Sudan.
We have many armies in Sudan. Our movements, we have our arms, and the Sudan army is there, the rapid support forces. So we want to make a joint military from all these forces and to be in charge of the protections of people in Darfur. That is the only solution.
Despite peace talks in South Sudan's capital, Juba, attacks against civilians have continued in Darfur. Hundreds of civilians were reportedly killed by unidentified militias in northern Darfur. The recent attacks sparked demonstrations in Juba, where peace talks have been going on since December last year. Mediators say they are hopeful a peace deal will be reached.
Regarding the issue of peace in Sudan, we have met all groups and we are progressing well. We would like to reach a final peace deal as soon as possible. That's what President Salva Kiir wants. But we would also like to achieve a durable peace for our brothers and sisters in Sudan. This is making the process take a little longer, but peace will finally come.
Sudan's government has agreed with the Sudan Revolutionary Front on power and wealth sharing during the country's transitional period, according to mediators. Sudan's interim government that came into power after the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir says its first priority is to find lasting peace in Sudan by including all warring parties in a peace process.
There are many armed groups operating independently in the Nuba Mountains, southern Kordofan, Blue Nile and Darfur regions of Sudan, meeting their demands such as admitting all the armed forces with their current ranks into Sudan's armed forces is a challenge that mediators say is delaying reaching a final peace agreement. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Alarm in Kenya over a spike in crimes committed by teenagers. And in Zimbabwe, a woman steps in to feed those left vulnerable as COVID-19 ravages the economy.
Culture, the thread that holds Africa together. Every corner of the continent has its own story. From the colorful threads in Morocco to the fairy dances of Botswana. But with great strides in technology, this very culture is struggling to stay pure. CGTN Africa brings you a brand new series, a deep dive into some of Africa's most unique communities and their race to survive in the 21st century. Join us as we take an intimate look at Africa's tribes in a flux.
I remember my son, I can't remember how old he was, but one day he said, "Mommy, tell them you're sorry."
She was a feisty young woman. who might see the bold and the beautiful. She was not afraid.
But Unity now, also as a judge, was a very progressive judge.
My legacy is to challenge myself.
Police in Kenya are alarmed over the increasing number of crimes involving teenagers across the country. CGTN's Nick Mudimba visited Kibera, one of the biggest informal settlements in the region. The slum is listed among the country's crime hotspots that's been identified by law enforcers.
Increased crime in different parts of Kenya has become a matter of grave concern for authorities. Police are worried by the increasing number of youth involved in crime, especially in major cities and towns.
During the curfew and since the closure of schools, where we have children who are idle at home, parents are not very keen on what their children are doing. I've noted twice or thrice where we have arrested small children, primary school children, robbing people of mobiles, and they go to sell to others.
We visit Kibera slums, one of the largest in Africa, identified as a hotspot where crimes involving teenagers have been reported. The schools have currently closed, and in our walk deep in the slum early in the morning, we meet several teenagers. Their friends and most take part in sporting activities, but with schools and training venues closed, they're largely idle. This is the chill spot, as they call it, where they relax as they ponder the next move.
So many youth are idle and don't have jobs. They view stealing and mugging as their easier option. That's where they can get their daily bread. They don't have a choice. Also, many of them are not well educated.
At the end of the day, you know, when you're idle and you're desperate, then there's little else to look up to, so I think that it's a normal thing that when someone is backed up to the end of the wall, they will have to do something to push back. And I think that's the result of what we are seeing in a lot of young people.
Accusing fingers are now being pointed at parents who, due to the current global pandemic, have to spend more time with their children. Many parents, however, think that guiding the young ones should be a collective social responsibility.
We are all together into this, because I remember a long time when we were still young, children were a responsibility of the whole community. But nowadays, it's like children are being left maybe for the teachers, or they are left for the parents, or they are left on their own.
Schools and educational facilities have also been put on the spot over their failure to inculcate moral values.
They should teach a few things of responsibility, like you can't steal from your community. At the end of the day, these are still your brothers and sisters.
With nearly 1 in 5 Kenyan youth unemployed, according to the World Bank, increasing cases of carjacking, burglary and robbery with violence are being reported across Nairobi and its slums.
We are not living amongst strangers. We are living amongst people who want money because they are hungry and they want to fend for themselves. And others see the best way to act for themselves is to go and pick what you have.
We should just go back to those olden days where a child's behavior was being shaped by the whole community.
It's clear responsibilities now are two-way traffic, parents and teachers. Schools are closed right now because of COVID-19, and many of the young people are taking responsibility into their hands. The crime rates, the numbers are actually mind-boggling. So the issue is the government to come in and, of course, support the young people who say they've been forgotten. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Ethiopia has repatriated hundreds of its citizens from Lebanon after the economy tanked due to the coronavirus pandemic. Among them, Alem Tsehai Nasir, a domestic worker. She was abandoned by her employers and had no means to get home. Here's her story.
Alem Tsehai Nasir is back in her home with her family in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa. She went to Lebanon dreaming her maid's job would help make a better life for her 6-year-old son, Christian. He was 2 the last time she saw him. She was fired when the pandemic and financial crisis hit Lebanon and was left on the curb outside the Ethiopian consulate in a suburb of Beirut. She's one of the hundreds of women abandoned by employers without the means to get home. Lebanese labor laws also offer little protection for migrant workers.
They just take them out and dump them on the streets with their belongings. I know women that have been raped, and I know some who were bitten by snakes while on the street. The problems they face are enormous. Even right now, there are many women on the streets waiting for someone to come to their rescue.
In late May, Alem Sahai was one of the around 650 women who returned to Ethiopia on a flight organized by Ethiopian authorities and the United Nations International Organization for Migration. Maureen Cheng, the IOM's chief of mission in Ethiopia, said women were still keen to migrate despite hearing horror stories.
They still choose to undertake these perilous journeys in the hope that they will succeed where others have failed. So yes, the dangers are for the most part well known, but clearly are not always a sufficient deterrent.
With little prospect of employment in Ethiopia, Nasir says she may not have a choice but to seek work abroad. But she will need to convince her mother, Wakito Metafaria, who wants her to stay.
I became very depressed and fell sick because of worrying too much about her. I spent the last 2 years living in anxiety. There were times that communication would stop for a long time. We rarely talked to her. The time passed for the whole family with anxiety. Thank God she is back home now in one piece.
COVID-19 is contributing to food insecurity in Zimbabwe. Many are struggling to put food on the table, while government support has yet to reach the majority of citizens. In the town of Chitungizwa, one resident has set up a food kitchen for her community. Chamgono has more.
Chitungwiza is one of Zimbabwe's impoverished high-density suburbs. Survival here is a daily struggle, and the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened the situation.
My husband is not formally employed, so he does part-time menial jobs that don't give him enough to buy food.
Plights like hers pushed one resident to start a feeding program to help the community. Samantha Murozoki feeds around 3,000 people at least twice a day.
People will go home satisfied. I've never turned anyone in the last 60 days, and that's a plus. That makes me really happy going to sleep knowing that every single person that has come to queue for food has been given food.
I have no money to buy food, so this program is really helping me a lot.
With the daily rise in coronavirus infections, the economic situation is likely to worsen before it gets better. Samantha is seeking a more sustainable approach to mitigate the impact of COVID-19.
So we've got small social development projects that we want to start, from your green bar soap making to dishwashing liquid. We also want to venture into agriculture. We want to be self-sufficient, so we need to grow our own food, raise our own chickens, have a piggery project growing, so we don't have to continue asking from the public to assist us, because this month alone has taught us that donations can come and go.
Grassroots initiatives like that of Samantha's is helping to bolster larger efforts. The Zimbabwean government is currently working with the World Food Programme to help feed millions in need of food aid. Chao Mgono, CGTN.
The spread of COVID-19 in Ghana has hampered efforts to overhaul the voters' register, which the government insists needs to be done just 5 months ahead of the general election. While Ghana has won international praise in recent years for the running of its elections, there have been political disagreements over which voters should be eligible to vote and whether overseas Ghanaians should be included at all. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
A race against time to compile Ghana's new voters register. The process was to begin in April, but it was postponed when the country was locked down due to the coronavirus pandemic. As the government eases restrictions, the Electoral Commission now has an uphill task to make the electoral roll ready before the December polls. At the registration centers, Safety measures, including the wearing of face masks, are being enforced to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
Nobody would like to risk his life into any unnecessary, unfortunate, whatever circumstances. And so everybody is taking precaution.
Compliance with physical distancing at voter registration centers has become a major challenge, something health experts say could lead to a further spread of the virus.
We are aware that some of us would prefer that we wait for the end of the pandemic before carrying out our processes such as this one. Others believe that since the virus may linger into long term, we must find ways to stay safe while engaging in our normal business. The latter view seems largely to reflect the global approach.
Despite the risk of compiling a new voters' roll amid the pandemic, the Electoral Commission says it needs it to conduct credible elections. The Electoral Commission plans to register more than 15 million voters by August, but political analysts say it will be difficult to meet that target due to the risks posed by the coronavirus pandemic. The main opposition party, the National Democratic Congress, was against the compilation of a new voters register. The party argued the old register was fit for purpose and that compiling a new one would be too costly to the state. However, after losing a court battle over the issue against the Electoral Commission, it has now urged its followers to participate in the voter registration exercise.
So far so good, everything is going on smoothly and people are registering. I was here around 5:15. Now when I was sitting 10-15 minutes later, people started coming, and as we see, today is a working day too.
Ghana has yet to flatten the curve of coronavirus infections, which keep rising by the day. But the government says it will go ahead to conduct the elections in December after compiling the voters register. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Let's take another look at our headlines this hour. The African Union Commission has launched an initiative to secure as many COVID-19 vaccine trials as possible for the continent. The Africa CDC Consortium for COVID-19 Vaccine Clinical Trials will see African countries work together to approach global vaccine developers and funders. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan denounced Egypt and the United Arab Emirates on Friday for supporting forces based in eastern Libya after Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi spoke with Libyan tribal leaders who called for Cairo to intervene in the civil war. Turkey has been providing military aid to the Tripoli-based government in the Libya conflict, while Egypt, the UAE and Russia have backed its foes in a rival administration based in the east. And the Sudanese government and a coalition of 9 opposition groups have entered into a final phase of peace talks. The government and the Sudanese Revolutionary Front are currently holding face-to-face talks in Juba. Those are some of our top stories this hour. Let's now go to Uche Okoronkwo for your latest business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Tunisia presents a post-COVID recovery plan as it concludes an IMF funding program. And the rising cost of living drains savings as people stay out of work.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Well, let's start off in Tunisia, where authorities have presented a post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan. They seek to conclude a new funding program with the International Monetary Fund within the next 3 or 4 months. Now, the Washington-based lender had earlier in April announced that it was planning to grant about $743 million in order to help support the Tunisian economy to navigate through the COVID-19 crisis. Here's CGTN's Adnan Ashaushi with the rest of those details.
Tunisia's finance minister, Nizar Yaish, noted that the government had received around $267 million from the International Monetary Fund during the coronavirus crisis. This emergency financing was meant to mitigate the economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis and social repercussions on the population.
This financing came on time at a very difficult period. We were lucky to get the money because no one was expecting the devastating impact of the coronavirus crisis. The government did not have enough resources in April, but now we are re-evaluating our partnership with the IMF.
The Minister of Finance added that the last two funding agreements with the IMF were not used for boosting the economy, creating jobs or improving the investment climate. Therefore, the new four-year program will focus on more realistic and achievable economic goals.
Honestly, the last two funding agreements with the IMF failed to achieve the expected goals in Tunisia. The economic and social sides were neglected, while the deal with the IMF only focused on the budgetary and monetary targets. Now we will devise a different four-year program which respects our needs and priorities.
The minister in charge of major projects announced the 2020-2021 Economic Rescue Plan. Lubna Jribi said the authorities will provide liquidity to companies with a state guarantee worth $500 million.
The rescue plan also involves continuing to apply the temporary layoff mechanism, with a budget of $30 million and allocating a budget of $250 million to companies undergoing a restructuring program.
The director of the IMF's Middle East and Central Asia Department announced that the International Monetary Fund is ready to provide additional financing to Tunisia should the North African state's government request a new program. The Minister of Finance said that the new program with the IMF must imperatively meet Tunisia's economic and social needs. Experts assert that the country must limit foreign debt in the next 4 years. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And let's head to Uganda now, where the pace of consumer prices continues to pick up. Figures from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics show that the consumer price index rose to 4.1% in the month ending June, and that's up from 2.8% in May 2020. Now, the increase is largely attributed to a rise in the cost of transport services in the country. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with more.
Negotiating for a better deal on ingredients needed for her family's dinner, Juliet has been out of work for a while due to the COVID-19 pandemic. She still needs to feed her family, but the prices are becoming unbearable.
I lecture students. They're at home and it's a private institution. When you're not working, that means you're not being paid any money. So the little you have to spend it on the daily things like food and what. You reach the market, things are expensive. So this COVID-19 period is really not a pleasant situation.
In early May, the government began gradually lifting lockdown measures, including a return for public and private transport. However, restrictions on movement in some food-producing areas continues to reflect the pickup in prices of food and related items.
The cost of transporting produce to the market is so high because the cars are still few on the road. So when these cabbages or pumpkins get here, the profit margin is very low. I have to pass on the cost to the customer so that I stay in business.
According to the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, there has been a general increase in consumer prices, and the consumer price data for the month of June shows a rise in annual transport services inflation of 34.2% in June from minus 0.3% recorded the month before. Prices are sensitive to shocks, and the COVID-19 pandemic has come with supply disruptions that have had an effect on the cost of food. This directly affects incomes of farmers, traders, and influences dietary choices of the consumers. The Uganda Statistics Bureau predicts prices are bound to come down as business returns to normal following the easing of the lockdown.
When you look at some areas, because of the closure of travels, the food has been rotting in some of these centers. So we had enough food, and this inflation has continued to decelerate.
But for many like Juliet, who is uncertain when she will be returning to work, her hope is to see prices go down quickly before her savings run out. Michael Balekesi, GTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, a recession continues to deepen. Statistics South Africa released the country's first quarter GDP data, showing a 2% contraction. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with more.
This is South Africa's third consecutive quarter of economic decline. The economy contracted 2% in the first 3 months of 2020, just as the country went into lockdown.
The rate of decline is a little bit less than what many people anticipated. I think going into this number, the expectation would be that the economy could decline by up to 5% in the quarter. So a fall of 2% is not good, but clearly it could have been worse.
Productive sectors such as mining, manufacturing and construction were the hardest hit.
Sectors that were negatively affected include things like electricity that were probably negative due to structural issues outside the issues related to the lockdown. Some sectors were positively affected by the anticipation of the lockdown. For instance, I think retail probably had a bit of panic selling supporting some parts of it. On the other hand, we probably did see some impact from, for instance, the fact that other countries had locked down earlier.
Obviously, some of the critical industries did decline. If you look at mining, there was a very sharp fall off. And I think that related to the fact that China at that point was struggling. China's economic activity declined quite sharply in the first quarter. They were importing a lot less commodities. Commodity prices were weaker.
Agriculture was positive, providing some relief, especially for food security. But farmers are feeling the strain of COVID-19, which could reverse any gains in the next set of numbers. The next quarter's data is also likely to be more severe, as the country is in lockdown.
I think that you're more likely to see at least 1.5 million jobs lost to in excess of 2 million jobs lost. And the number, of course, depends on a couple of things. Of course, the recovery plan, just how quickly the rest of the world recovers, as well as just how long the lockdown lasts.
South Africans are being warned of tougher times ahead. The economy was in trouble before COVID-19. It's now in a deeper hole. The government is being urged to take urgent action to arrest the decline. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And still in the country, South Africa's Auditor General has released the report into the finances of the country's 257 municipalities and 21 municipal entities. Now, the report has unveiled the extent of the meltdown of South Africa's local governments, with only about 21 of them achieving a clean audit. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with more.
The Office of the Auditor General, Kimi Makwetu, uncovered more than $200 million in unauthorized, irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, highlighting the challenges facing most municipalities, including Johannesburg.
In Johannesburg, there are a couple of issues in supply chain, for example, with deviations from following proper supply chain processes. Johannesburg does have their financial accounting system properly managed, but the big thing for them is to make sure that when they do procurement, they do it in accordance with the prescribed rules of procurement. That's really one of the key issues they still need to address.
There's a bigger problem in most municipalities which national government has to find a solution for.
The one level is a fundamentally political task about oversight and leadership with regards to what needs to happen. And that, to a large extent, is where the governance issues are located. But indeed, there are the administrative and management issues that also require attention in terms of the quality of people recruited into the system, accountability in the system, but also controls in the local government system.
There's a view that perhaps repeat offenders who mismanage municipal finances and reporting need to be taught a lesson.
We are suggesting to National Treasury that they must look into implementing Section 216 of the Constitution, which empowers them to say until the municipality has begun to deal with corrective measures of what have been identified by the Auditor General, their equitable share must be withheld. And the plan must be clear, proper, followed through, and provinces will be assisting in this.
The Auditor General has been given increased powers. The objective is clear.
There's a huge need to uplift the financial management disciplines in local government, and if we do it right and we do it consistently, we'll start seeing some of the local economic activity also coming along, because most people do not want to invest in towns that are not well run.
While South Africa has seen a lot of service delivery protests, it's also about managing the money and how it's spent. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, that is all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, Egypt releases its largest budget in history in order to help deal with the uncertainty imposed by the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, we'll bring you more on that. Top of the hour for now. Back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Ruchim. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, we look at efforts to promote racial diversity in the world of classical ballet.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
The Black Lives Matter movement continues to inspire millions around the world, and the anti-racism conversation is now reaching the world of classical ballet. Ballet has been slow to accept black dancers in major companies, resulting in a lack of diversity, equity and inclusion. But 3 professional dancers are hoping to change this narrative through social media. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
Classical ballet has evolved, but it's still not where it could be. To this day, it remains mostly white. Based around their personal experiences, 3 professional dancers created Blacks in Ballet, a social media platform that pushes for change. Fabio Mariano dances for Collage Dance Collective. He uses this platform to highlight, celebrate and collaborate with Black ballet dancers around the world.
We saw a need showing people the amount of beautiful and talented Black dancers that there are in the world, that a lot of people don't know about them. And with that, we hope to reach company directors to see that there are Black dancers, so they don't have the excuse of saying we don't find talented Black dancers good enough to hire for our companies.
From the slums of Rio de Janeiro to New York's ballet stage, Ingrid Silva is a professional ballerina for the Dance Theater of Harlem in the US.
It's been a blessing creating for the first time a platform exclusivity for Black dancers worldwide. People always say, where are the Black dancers? You know, we don't know them, we don't see them. Where are the Black dancers? And I was like, there is so many of us. We highlight the past, future, and present. It's really important to know the history, who came before us, and gave the space for us to be here today.
In South Africa, Juan Galdino is a senior soloist for Joburg Ballet. He hopes their platform will spread the passion and message further.
It's sad because you have to do this platform. It's sad that we have to talk about it. But it's amazing because it's happening. It's amazing and very inspiring to see that people now is looking at different eyes. Today I can use my voice and my own experience, not just to make awareness, but to inspire other Black dancers, to help educate not just the dancers who actually dance right now, but educate the entire system. Because it's a situation that I really think that everyone have to understand that happen, and Black people don't really have a lot of opportunity in that career.
The platform has become even more relevant now because of the Black Lives Matter movement and renewed debates on history and equality.
What is happening to ballet now? And it's sort of moving towards celebrating its black artists and sort of working to fix the mistakes of the past, and with the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening at the same time.
This initiative hopes to have a fundamental change in the world of ballet and to keep the dream alive for so many. Julie Shire, thje, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, filmmakers are using humor to educate people about the coronavirus. The awareness campaign has aired on television and spread on social media. Thuli Shabalala has more.
These filmmakers in Burkina Faso are creating mini movies about the coronavirus. The films have a touch of comedy and are made in the local language. Producers aim to raise awareness about COVID-19 prevention.
At this event, we took 11 young comedians from Burkina Faso who made creations on COVID-19. They brought out everything fun and funny about the virus. We also did sketches in the 4 most spoken languages in Burkina Faso. And through these sketches, we gave awareness messages that were broadcast on local television channels and on social media networks. So that's how we contributed to this fight against COVID-19.
Burkinabe filmmakers have recorded more than 50 films during the months of lockdown.
We've shown the population through our capsules what to do and what not to do to stop the spread of the virus. People don't like the sketches to be serious. They like the humor. So we went through humor, and it amuses them, and at the same time, it educates them.
Local citizens say they have enjoyed watching the films on television and social media.
I have seen on television and on the internet several videos on COVID-19 that have left a lasting impression on me. There are 2 Burkinabe actresses, Afisatu and Albertine, who made videos together, and I like them a lot. And also I learned a lot about COVID-19. And then they got the message across in a very humorous way, and it was very interesting.
I didn't know much about social distancing measures, but thanks to these videos, I finally understood how to avoid being contaminated.
Through their videos, Burkina Faso filmmakers have made their own contribution to the fight against the pandemic. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Your sports news coming up next. Still ahead, South African Football League resumption delayed further despite